This is a video that walks through some calculator commands when answering questions about correlation and regression. So the objectives for this video is to prepare your calculator to make sure it's ready for inputs and graphing. Input your data. We're going to save the data in the list, and then we're going to recall that data. Finally, we're going to start the actual regression and correlation part, and we're going to create a scatter plot. We're going to find the correlation coefficient and the regression equation. We're going to view the scatter plot along with the regression line, and then we're going to use a trace option on the calculator to make our predictions. So let's first make sure our calculator is ready for this. And what I'm going to do first in our calculator is take a look at my stat plot. So second function and the y equals 2 button gives us a stat plot. And as I browse through here, I want the first one to be on and everything else to be off. So you may have random things that are on or off. So for me, I want to turn the second one off and then turn the first one on. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to select 4, and that would turn all the plots off. And so if I take a quick look at my stat plot, I see that everything is turned off now. Okay? So what I'm going to do to prepare is to go to my plots, my first plot, and then I'm going to turn this one on. So while it's blinking on the on, I'm going to press enter, and then I'm going to go down and I'm going to select the first option, that is your regression, your scatter plot. And then my X list is going to be L1 and my Y list is going to be L2. And then for my mark, I will choose that square because that's going to give us the best viewing for the scatter plot. Okay, so this is all fixed up. I'm going to go back to the home screen, and then I'm going to now take a look at my y equals 2. I'm going to eventually want to put my regression equation there, so I'm going to go to y equals 2. And I see I have various things here, so I just want to clear everything. And then I see I have more equations. I'm going to arrow down to the next line, and I'm going to clear that as well. And so if you have more things to clear out with some odd or strange symbols, just go down to that and clear it. And then my final thing to prepare is to take a look at my list. So I'm going to press Stat, and then I'm going to select Edit. And then I have some data in L1 and L2, but this isn't the data that I want. So I'm going to go up and move my cursor up to L1, clear that, and then I have to press either the down button or the enter button to make sure everything is cleared out. So I'll do the same thing for L2. So I'm going to go to L2, go up, clear, and then enter. So now my lists are empty. My Y information is cleared up, and my stat plot, I see that my first plot is on. It's a regression, it's a scatter plot with L1 and L2, and then I'll be using these dots. And that's already turned on, so I'm ready for the problem. Okay, now let's input our data. So to input our data, we'll go to Stat. Let me clear this again first. So I'm going to hit Stat and enter, or the number 1. And I will put my data information here. So the data that we're going to use is from a problem here. My femur input will be my x values, my humerus input will be my y values. So I'll go on and type all that stuff in. and enter it. And while I'm entering this, it's always good to arrow up and go through those numbers once more to make sure that you've entered everything correctly. Alright, so that's my femur input. And then next is my humerus input. So now my data is inputted in L1 and L2. Again, just a quick browse up to make sure that you've inputted your data correctly. Okay. Now that that's done, our next step is to save the data in the list. So I have L1 and L2. So I'm going to go back to the home screen, second function in mode, or second function in quit. Let me clear everything out, and then I'll re-clear this. And then let's take a look at how to save the data in the list. So I have L1, so I'll press second function the number 1, and then I'm going to store that, STO, into a list. Now it has to be specific that this variable that I'm going to select is a list. So I'm going to press second function and stat. That's going to give me some options for the list. And I'm going to go to OPS for different types of operations. And I can scroll down, arrow down to look for this, but I know that it's all the way in the bottom, so I'll arrow up and they'll loop down to the bottom of the list. And I want to select this little L. And then now I just want to call this whatever I want to call this. So I'll call it F for femur. So I'm going to need to type in an alpha here, an alphabet letter. So I'm going to press alpha, and that's going to give me my blinking A. And then I will look for F in the color, the same color as my alpha button. So that's F. It has a little F sign on the side here. And then that's what I'll call my femur list. So I'll press enter. And then I'll do the same thing to put my list 2. So second function and list 2. And I'll store that into a list. Second function stat OPS up. And then that little L. And then this time I want to use alpha and H. And then press enter. So now that means if I go back to my list and for some reason this gets cleared out, I know that I still will have my original list in F and in H. So I will now recall the data that I had saved and put it back into L1 and L2. Now doing this for this particular problem, if I'm just going to use femur and humerus list one time just to answer these questions, then this is probably not a good idea. But it is a good idea to save lists if this is something that we'll be using in the future. So I'm going to go back to stat. Well, let's clear this first. Let's go back to stat, and I'm going to recall my list and place it back into L1 and L2. So notice that my right below L1 is highlighted. I want to actually be in L1 to create my list. So I'm going to arrow up, and so now L1 is highlighted. Then I will go and hit second and stat to go find my list of lists, and then I will look for the femur list. So I think that is called F. Here's F. So I will select that. And notice that that F on the screen right now does not have a little L, but if you select that, that F has a little L with it, so you know that it's a list. I'll press enter, and so my femur list is listed again, 38, 56, 59, 64, and 74. Let's repeat the same process for L2. Up on L2, second stat, and look for my list that's labeled H. This is my list that's labeled H. I'll press enter to select it, and then enter again, and now my list is back in L2. Alright, the next thing we want to do is to create a scatter plot. Create a scatter plot. So while you have your list in L1 and L2, let us go to the stat and plot. Now we already have this fixed up, but let's just go there and double check to make sure everything is in order. I'll press enter to select my first plot, and I'll see that it's on. I see that it's the scatter plot selected and L1 and L2. So I will just go ahead and press second function and quit. And then I'll hit zoom, and then I will look for zoom stat. I think in almost all the calculators, zoom stat is the 9th option. So I really didn't have to scroll down here. If I know that it's in my 9th option, I'll just press the number 9, and then there's my scatter plot. You can trace a scatter plot around by hitting the trace button. And then when I hit my trace button, I see this is P1, L1, L2. And if I look at my first point, I have the point 38, 41. That is the corresponding to the first point that you put on. If I right arrow, I'll see 56 and 63. That's my second point. And then I can keep bouncing around by using the left and right arrows. Okay, so that's my scatter plot. The next thing we want to do is we want to use the correlation coefficient, or find the correlation coefficient and the regression line. So there are several ways to do this. Let's go back to the home screen, and let's clear the home screen, and I'll clear my key list here too so you can follow along. To find the correlation coefficient and regression line, there are several ways to do that, but what I'm interested in is to put the regression line into the y equals 2 as well. And so I will select a regression line test. Well, instead of selecting the test, we'll go to stat and then calc. And then I want to look for our regression line in the form of a plus bx. Now there's a regression line here, linreg, that is ax plus b, but like I said, I want to use linreg a plus bx because that's the one that's used mostly in statistics. So let's select that. Now after this, we're going to put, normally we can just put two inputs. We could input L1 and L2. So we'll start off by putting your X list as L1, and then there's a comma over here. Let's select L2 for your Y list. Now you can stop here and then run this, but I want to do one more thing, and that is to store the regression line into Y1. So I'm going to put another comma, and then I want to find Y1. So where do you find Y1? You go to vars, and then you right arrow to yvars, you select function, and it's the first one, Y1. So I have linreg a plus bx. I have x list is L1, the y list is L2, and then your regression equation, you want that to be stored into y1. Okay, let us press enter. Now we see some valuable information here. The first thing we want to focus on is the R. That is your correlation coefficient. And usually when you report your correlation coefficient, you want it accurate to 3 decimal places. We'll put 4 here. So 0.9941 is your correlation coefficient. Now your regression equation is y is equal to a plus bx. Now remember, I want us to start using y hat now. So we'll use y hat instead of y is equal to a is a negative 3.6595 or 96. Normally I'd want this rounded off to 3 decimal places, so if we round this off to 3 decimal places, the 6 will make the 9 into a 10. Well, that would make the 9 into a 0, and then the 6 into the 5 into a 6. So 3.65958 rounded off to 3 decimal places, we'll say that's a negative 3.660. So that is your A, that's your y-intercept. The number next to the x is your slope, and the b, the slope in this case, is going to be 1.196, or we'll call it 1.197. So that's a plus 1.197. And don't forget that there is a variable x that comes after that. So this is your regression equation, your regression line. Okay. Now let's view the scatter plot. This time the scatter plot with the regression line. So remember, when you hit zoom and zoom stat, you saw the scatter plot, but let's double check to make sure that our linreg command placed our regression equation into y1. So let's press y equals to. We see that this line that we just wrote, negative 3.660 plus 1.197 times x is already placed in our line. So this gives us a big plus here. So now when you press zoom and zoom stat, or this time I'll just hit the number 9, you see the scatter plot as well as the regression line. So here's our scatter plot along with our regression line. So the last bit of information they want us to do is to make a prediction for the length of a humerus bone if the femur is 40 centimeters. So this is your regression line, and maybe you might be interested in rewriting your regression line where instead of you're saying y, let's start with x. X is the explanatory variable, and the explanatory variable for us was the length of the femur. And then the response variable for us was the humerus. So if we're going to use this equation to make a prediction, then we have to put in the value of 40 for the femur. And then so this is our calculation. So if we go back to our calculator, and let me clear everything and just do this calculation, I have a negative 3.66 plus 1.197 times 40, and I get a humerus length of 44.22 centimeters. Okay. I actually wanted to do this a slightly different way, and as our last objective, we're going to use trace to make a prediction using our line. So let's go again to trace, or you can, as long as you've done the zoom stat already, you can go back to trace. But let's go back and do the zoom stat. So let's hit zoom, and again click on the number 9 because that's our zoom stat. And then last time we hit trace, we were tracing along the plots, the L1 and L2 numbers. So if you press the right arrow and left arrow, it'll move you along the plots. Okay? What we're interested in is not the plots though, we're interested in the line. So if you press the up or down arrow, it's going to move to whatever other functions you're plotting. In this case, we plotted y1, and now on top of my screen it says y1. If you press the left and right arrow, you will be moving along that line, that linear equation. So ideally, we want to get this arrow going until our x value is 40. But sometimes we'll see that it doesn't give you the exact value of 40. So like in this scenario, I have 39.9, and if I right arrow, I got 40.37, and I didn't get exactly 40. So if you want the actual value of 40, you can just press 4, 0, and then that's going to give you an x value of 40. And when you press enter, it's going to give you the y value as well. So using this, we see that the y value is 44.216, which rounds off to 44.22. So in either case, we can get the correct answer. This tracing method is going to be more precise than getting the information from the line where we rounded off the y-intercept and the slope to 3 decimal places. When you do things in a calculator, you'll see the equation didn't really round off to 3 decimal places. It kept a lot of those digits, so we have a more precise measurement here. Okay, so just to summarize what we did, we prepared your calculator, inputted the data, and saved the data on the list. We recalled the data and then used that data. So this first 4 steps is not really that big of a deal unless there's going to be some data that we're going to want to recall. More importantly, we created a scatter plot. We found the correlation coefficient and the regression line. We viewed the scatter plot with the regression line, and then we used the trace option to find our prediction. Alright, so I hope that this video was helpful, and I hope you can use it to help prepare you for quizzes and exams.